Welcome to this edition of In Transition. I'm Libra Johnson. Our world today is filled with a bevy of social media platforms that continuously feed our daily lives with amazing stories of great courage in the face of change, adversity, triumph, and tragedy. Many of these stories capture our attention and our hearts, but just as many are never told. These are the stories of everyday lives in transition, people overcoming great change to discover a new purpose, a hidden gift, a new normal. On today's show, we'll ask you to imagine experiencing a conflict about your birth sex and your gender identity. How one expresses his or her own gender and sexuality should be a very personal decision. However, that is quite often not the case. Nearly 1% of the population is identified as transsexual. Many today are more familiar with these stories of transgender lives in transition as a result of media coverage of celebrities. However, fear, hate, and discrimination still leave many transgender lives in jeopardy. Let's take a look at a clip. As far back as Alexandra can remember, she felt different. A nagging feeling as a child that she was somehow a girl trapped in a boy's body became a very clear feeling as a young adult that she could no longer shake. And although she went through the motions, trying to live up to the expectations of family, friends, and her very traditional blue-collar community, her feeling that she was a woman trapped in a man's body became more than a feeling. It was, for all intent and purposes, a fact that she could no longer ignore. So finally, after marrying and trying her best to fulfill someone else's dreams for her, she stepped out of the shadow of her former life and gender identity to become the woman she always knew she was. And although her transition has not been an easy one, she has no regrets about her choice and now spends a great deal of time advocating for the rights of others in the transgender community and enjoying the life she always knew was hers. Joining me is Alexandra, a courageous transgender woman who stepped out from behind the shadows and made the decision to undergo a critical transformation that may have in fact saved her life. Welcome to the show, Alexandra.
Well, thank you.
So, thank you for being here today. This is a very important topic, and in some ways a hot button issue for a lot of people, and it's a shame because it's very personal. So why it should be something that everyone is thinking about and everyone has an opinion about is what we want to talk about today.
Okay.
So thanks for being here. Talk to us about your story. I think a lot of people always ask that question, how far back do you remember knowing that something was different?
Oh, it probably goes back to even being, whether I was 3 or 5 years old, in which case, you're aware that something is different and you just, at that time don't really know what to do about it or what, is happening. And as things go, you're kind of trying to fit into how everybody kind of expects you, looking at you as a young boy and thinking that you want to play with boy type things and whatnot. And it, just you have this feeling that, gee, what can I do about this? But, of course, you know absolutely nothing that can be done, and you try and just play the role that you're, as a young boy and
Right.
with things.
So let me ask you, where are you from? Because I wonder sometimes does where you're from make it even more difficult. Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Detroit, and overall, I would say that, well, I didn't really transition totally until I came to the Washington area.
Okay.
However, there were many times, as I can describe in my earlier stories, that I kind of see now that maybe a lot of people kind of really saw a different side of me than sometimes I was willing to admit about myself.
Than you even saw yourself. So you talked about being a little person. We're talking 3 or 4 year old. Because I think sometimes people wonder, wow, does a 3 or 4 year old even understand that? But I guess when I think about the roles we put on children, we buy doll houses and baby carriages for little girls and toy guns and whatever else for little boys. So I guess it is possible as early as 3 or 4, based on just toy selection, to start thinking, this is really not what I'm interested in. So it was that clear for you that it was just as easy as, I would rather be playing with that?
Yes.
than that as a little person.
To some degree, you can make do with what you have. Like say, and I don't remember at the time whether it was toy soldiers or trucks or whatever, but basically you can take the toy soldiers and kind of think of them in terms of interacting, with each other and interacting with other people, as opposed to going and shooting people.
Okay.
And you can look at, just trucks and firemen and various figures and kind of make a real life out of them, And that's kind of even very early on, I think, how I felt.
So early on, when it became clearer to you, even as an adolescent, did you have any anyone in the community that might have helped you start to figure out, okay, this is something, I'm not just a little person who feels like he's losing his mind? Was anyone you felt like you could look to?
See, that was the difficulty when I grew up, is that, of course, there was no internet. There were no support groups, nobody to turn to, really. When I kind of, even in my early teenage years, I think I finally started having somewhat of a realization that I really should have been born a woman. And that when, I did actually kind of come out to my mother, though I think some of that might have been when she discovered my female clothes in my bedroom that was basically either hers or my older sister's.
And how old were you then? You were a teenager?
Yes, probably maybe preteen or early teen,
Okay.
13 maybe.
So this was difficult.
And yes, it always is kind of, especially at that time, trying just to come to grips with, who you were and why that, you had to basically be in this role as a little boy when basically you felt like a little girl.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then did you think growing up in sort of a Midwestern town that may have made it even more difficult, some of what was expected of men and boys and girls and women?
To some degree. Now, when I say that, even I basically did kind of come out a bit to my mother, to my sister, my brother-in-law. I kind of discussed it with them, though even there they kind of never really had any idea as to what I could do about it. And but my father, on the other hand, who was a working class union kind of a adult worker type person in Detroit, was of course very conservative, and who just when, in fact, if anything, he was always trying to impress on me that I needed to be more aggressive, more
That we've heard these stories. I'm actually going to want to hear more from you about that when we come right back.
Okay.
Up next, we'll hear more from Alexandra as we discuss the issues associated with coming out, and we'll find out if her spouse stayed, what her family thought, and what it was like going back to work. We'll be right back.
Check out this chef, right?
So gay.
Please don't say that. It's like if I thought this pepper shaker was stupid and I said, man, this pepper shaker is so 16-year-old boy with a cheesy mustache. When you say that's so gay, do you realize what you say? Knock it off.
Welcome back. According to Atlantic Magazine's 2008 article, A Boy's Life, diagnoses of gender identity disorder among adults have tripled in Western countries since the 1960s. For men, the estimates range from 1 in 7,400 to 1 in 42,000. But for women, the frequency of diagnosis is lower. So, let's get back to a little bit about that coming out, because I would imagine that's a pivotal moment in this journey that you've been on.
Yes.
You mentioned your mom kind of knowing based on seeing some of your sister's clothing. Would that be sort of how that began for you?
Okay, and even at that point, I think, she kind of always wanted the best for me, and always wanted me to, be happy. But at the same time, I think she was always looking back on, it's, as people might do, is kind of maybe I'll, kind of grow out of it, get over it, or whatever. But she basically kind of, at least allowed me in, whenever we could, to kind of have some of those conversations.
A wonderful mother.
Yes.
Good for
Yeah,
her.
she was great.
Well, then you talked about your father, you said he was a factory worker in Detroit.
Yes.
So he was sort of, old school. He had a difficult
Yes.
time with this?
Now, even there, it was interesting, though, that one, like I say, of the conversations that he had when he was always trying to impress that about being more aggressive and being, a lot more of a
Boy-like.
man, a boy.
Right.
And basically, he always would bring up, a couple times, would bring up the story about how in the old days, in the ancient days, when somebody that couldn't quite cut it as a man, that they would turn them to be a eunuch. And when I think about that afterwards, it's kind of like, well, gee, actually, he was kind of starting with some of the first transsexual type conversations that, that
Right.
existed.
He
but
had
they
no
didn't really
idea.
have no idea.
He had
Right.
no idea. So listen, I wonder about that pressure that your father was putting on you, whether he knew it or not. Would this be the reason, because you ended up getting married, do you think part of that was the pressure to just try your best to fit in?
Well, yes, it wasn't just my father or the home situation or school or whatnot. It was just that I really felt that like I say, there was really nobody to turn to in terms of what I could do about it. And so it was basically that I kind of just felt that I had to maintain this life that I was in as a boy and to do what I could do.
So getting married felt like a next step.
Well, and part of that, though, in getting married was that I met a woman, Wendy, that I just, really enjoyed being with, and we've really, had bonded together. We actually even had known each other for a very short time when we moved in to her place in Birmingham, Michigan, and at the time, I really loved her, and she really loved me. And it was in terms of just, feeling inside that I still felt like, that I should have been born a woman. But the fact that up to that point, that I had basically been living my life in this role as a male, I, felt that I could very well, though, we really liked each other, and I wanted to
give it a try.
Make that a try. And I basically felt that, I was able to, just perform those roles, so to speak, of being a male, even though my testosterone level, I guess now I find out, was always very low. So,
Okay.
that was part of that.
Yeah.
And we never had kids, so that actually was...
So now, let me ask you this, because most people would want to know. You and your wife stayed together. You and your spouse stayed together. And it's sort of a testament to a friendship, a commitment to each other.
Yes.
It's pretty incredible.
Yes. A lot of it was that, well, certainly over time there, our relationship kind of was not the sexual relationship type thing anymore.
The dynamic had changed a little bit.
Right. But it was more of just a bonding together as two people that were together and enjoyed life, together.
So you're still married. So this means that you sort of work with each other around relationships and the possibility of possibly seeing other people. I mean, it's very personal, but I think most people would wonder, you're still married. Does this mean you give each other a little bit of freedom so that everyone's happy in the relationship?
Yes, it's just now my spouse especially has kind of always said that if I wanted to have a relationship with somebody, that she's perfectly wants me to be happy too at wherever that I might go with that. And at the same time, though, I have not really felt at this point in time, it was basically when I fully transitioned. Again, I was about 50 years old. And so at that point already, I did not feel like I really needed to try and go out to establish an immediate relationship type thing. Though I have identified, at least personally, as being bisexual. And I now even look back on many previous years where I kind of see myself where even male friends that I had, that I had kind of a lot more of a bonding experience with them than maybe as just, even though there was no relationship.
Yeah, so as time has gone by, you look back even now and say certain things were already in place and you had to step into that. We're going to go to a break in a minute, but I did want to ask you, you mentioned going back to your hometown and giving your mother's eulogy. I think you mentioned being a little nervous, not knowing that some of these extended family members had not seen you as a woman. What was that? You said it was not a bad experience, though.
Okay. Yes, that was in 2006. Now, I had just transitioned. I guess we'll go into that a little later, too, about on the job. But I transitioned in 2005, in which I came out full-time totally and also on the job. In October of 2006 was when my mother passed away in Michigan.
So what was that feeling like? Because you mentioned, I want to go to break in a minute, but you did mention that it wasn't as bad of an experience as you thought it would be.
And no, as it turned out, when I went out to Michigan, I had, talked to my sister, and she wasn't really even, I guess, aware that I was fully out now as it was. But she had said that, yes, I could give the eulogy.
Wow.
And my mother was, well, basically it was, the funeral was in a Catholic church. I was born and raised Catholic. And I, had been, well, anyway, I'd kind of gotten out of that whole, religious type philosophies for quite some time. But basically going back to the this Catholic church service, and I stood up at the front altar there giving the eulogy for my mother, and in describing to all of my family just all of the great things that my mother had done and how she was so caring for people like she worked with the Capuchin monk soup kitchen. She did a lot of things like that. That they really all came up to me and said, "Wow, that was great," and everything.
Wow.
And
that had to be a great feeling.
They, even in the showing and stuff, when we were, I had a lot of people that kind of just came up to me. Even my uncle, who, when we had this whole collage of pictures, would come up and say, "Yeah, you see, back then my hair was a little bit longer too," or whatever, just to kind of identify.
He was making the connection to you, which is a wonderful thing. We're going to come right back. Up next, Alexandra will take us inside the politics of LGBT rights, discuss the consequences of hate, and share what's on the horizon. We'll be right back.
Do you like this top? So gay. Really? Yeah, it's totally gay.
You really shouldn't say that.
Say what?
Well, say that something's gay when you mean it's bad. It's insulting. What if every time something was bad, everybody said, "Oh, that's so girl wearing a skirt as a top"?
Oh, you are.
Those are cute jeans, though. When you say that's so gay, do you realize what you say? Knock it off.
Welcome back. In October of 2009, President Barack Obama signed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act into law. Evidence of positive change. But just this past spring, a transgender woman was beaten at a Baltimore County McDonald's. What made it worse? One of the assailants was a 14-year-old girl, and the person who recorded it was an employee. So what does that say about where we are now? You got movement forward and then movement backward.
Well, yes, and well, first, even back in 2005, when I was just starting my transition process, and I had a very good transgender woman friend who, when we were going into the parking lot by her place, which was around the in the Fairfax County portion of Falls Church, as we got out of the car, there were 4 guys that were standing there, and the first thing they just were asked was, "Did we have any money?" And as we said no, and we started walking towards the apartment complex door, one of them kind of all of a sudden yells, "Are you gay?" And then started just kind of coming towards us there. And we kept kind of going and trying to, get to the door, but he caught my friend Samantha and punched her in the face.
Wow.
And the next thing I know, actually even some of this guy's friends were actually trying to hold him back from doing anything originally. But then when that happened, all of a sudden, I mean, I turned around and just saw what had just happened. And the next thing I know, one of the other friends now kind of punched me in the face.
Wow.
And my glasses fell off. And I just, I can't see anything without my glasses. So I was trying to reach down to grab them. And when I did, I got punched again.
So you clearly you understand this discrimination. You don't understand it. You have been a victim of it. It
Yes,
is
I have
clearly
seen it.
a result of fear and hate and ignorance. Let me ask you this, because I'll go back just a little bit.
Okay.
Just in terms of fear and hate and ignorance, I do know that from my research that a lot has to be done to make sure that a transgender person can go back to work and not be dealing with the issues of coworkers and the issues of things as simple as a bathroom. So tell me how transitioning back at work can actually be a little more sensitive than any of us would even imagine.
Yes. And now, at the time there, I'd say, when I was just about to start on hormone treatments in 2005, I had been pretty well full-time outside of work. But at work, I was, basically still kind of, dressed in the male mode and whatnot. And when, first, it was kind of that I started actually then, since I was full-time everywhere else, I kind of went out and bought female polo shirts, and that to me it was a big deal that they buttoned to the left and whatever, and dress slacks, and my hair was a little bit longer, and I had my ears pierced and whatnot. But yet, I wasn't really, it was in an information technology type environment where to begin with people were sometimes, could dress in a wide variance and stuff. So then I was involved with a gay and lesbian employee organization at that time. Where I worked, I was a contractor to a government agency. And they were, very supportive, and they knew a lot of the people in the HR department.
Excellent.
With the agency.
Were there already provisions in place, or did you have to help make some of those things come about?
There were, at that point in time, no provisions whatsoever for transgender employees.
Wow.
And to a large degree, there still are not.
And these are some things that we may not even think of. For example, I think what you shared in the pre-interview was that something as simple as a bathroom, having it be a male-female bathroom so that it isn't the male bathroom and the female bathroom. That's how simply we could create an environment where we wouldn't even have to think about it. It's a single-use male-female bathroom. And you're saying that's not very common in workplaces.
No. In fact, well, yes. And early on, when I first did finally start transitioning, and they were, all of the HR people were very much behind it. And though even then, they kind of came in, and sometimes I kind of felt a little taken back that they were kind of given these big, had required everybody to show up to hear them say that they were all supportive of it and everybody else should be, and whatnot, which basically meant that I couldn't interact one-on-one without people feeling that they were already in that position. Right. But anyway, they kind of agreed then to allow a single-use restroom, but it was on like the first floor of our building, so you had to go downstairs to use this
so it
single-use restroom.
Still feels separate and different.
Yeah, and they weren't, they at that point would not allow me to use the women's restroom on that same floor upstairs. Okay. Later on, basically it was in transitioning then to another job, and that was basically because of the contract that I worked on there kind of changed.
Right.
That I then moved to another position that now they basically were had already now fully seen me coming in. My name was changed. I mean, my appearance and everything was pretty well changed.
So it was moving
and they were
forward.
pretty well accepting right away when I
Wonderful.
came in the door to be using the women's restroom.
Wonderful.
And it was kind of interesting even there when some of my women friends that I worked with that would be sitting in the stall next to me and start carrying on the conversation with you between the stall door.
You knew it was done at that point.
Yeah, except that at that point, I mean, it's kind of like, okay, this is a little bit different for me. And at the same time, I'm also a little bit afraid, though, that my voice, which I still haven't been able to have a lot of voice change, that, that somebody else might hear me.
Right.
But at least there, I knew that, people were very accepting, and it was great to be able to relate to women that I worked with, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, we see it on the news all the time. There's tons of hate. These crimes are happening. You know, obviously the president did sign that law. So we're seeing some progresses. I've got about 30 seconds left, and I don't want to miss asking you about this. You are on the executive board of the Gertrude Stein Democratic Club.
Yes.
Where are we going with this? What needs to happen? What should people be thinking or looking out for?
Yes. Well, in D.C. especially, I mean, we have one of the best human rights acts in the country, which was passed that basically has even designated that any single-use facility in the city has to be not even identified as male or female, but just a single-use facility.
Wonderful.
And as well as basically in housing and employment and across the board, you know, that there are laws on the books to basically give transgender people the, you know, the same rights that everybody else has, but basically not being able to discriminate against them because of that.
Well, I know that the research is showing that because of the discrimination, transgender people are suffering in areas of employment, of housing, and obviously we have transgender teenagers who are succumbing to suicide and all kinds of things. You mentioned the Wanda Olson House. There are a lot of wonderful organizations that are out there that are helpful. Do you have a couple you can name that we can provide information for?
Yes, there's Transgender Health Empowerment is the organization in the city in D.C. that is very much involved with, I'd say, a lot of poor, many homeless people in the city, and a lot of that has been that they were homeless because they were kicked out of their homes.
Absolutely.
And whatnot too. And so, you know, they are basically working, and that's why they actually created the Wanda Alston House.
Okay.
Now, Wanda Alston herself was a former LGBT liaison officer to the mayor.
So this is a place where young people can go.
But yeah, it was set up specifically for young people to be able to go there that were homeless or that needed help. And, you know, and it's been a wonderful organization.
Okay, so as much as there is hate, it sounds like things are moving forward.
But also in D.C., though, there has been a lot of hate crimes recently that have been attributed to directly because the individual is transgender.
Okay.
And
so there's a lot of work to do.
And there's a lot of work to
A lot of educating to do.
Yes.
All righty. Well, you telling your story is a part of us moving forward, because the more we understand, the more I think we gain respect for the fact that no matter what, we are human beings walking the face of this earth. So thank you. Your insights, I think, will help to educate us all, and the more we know, the better we'll do. That is my hope. Thank you so much. Well, that's our show. I want to thank my guest, Alexandra Beninda, for sharing her story. And if you have a story you'd like to share about a life in transition, email us at www.info@intransitionwithlibra.com or visit our website at www.intransitionwithlibra.com. And don't forget to like us on Facebook at In Transition with Libra Johnson and follow us on Twitter at IT with Libra Show. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.